Hello, happy to greet you, Nikel. I heard you were lost in the way, but happy that you arrived and reached Nikel. All of you, I hope you got a map. We hope it will be a guiding map also as a second part of our program. First, we will give you a short introduction of our thematic and research, how we structure it, and that will be kind of perception filter for our guiding tour. We will read and go through the slides and represent your catalog that we collect during the research. Probably we'll pass it by. Yep. Our project explores the phenomenon of industrial mining settlement nickel through the lens of unique materials, substances, textures, and artifacts emerge within the decades this settlement exists. Through the catalogue of the artifacts, we present the nickel settlement as a material system, as a multiscalar expression of the new matters appeared and evolved while embedded in the town fabric. We use a series of photos and diagrams to trace how this matter acts on both. One, a micro scale of physical properties of the material, and two, macro scale of social economical processes in the town, in the environment of the region. We're interested in unique local assembly of interactions of matter and energies driven by nature, industry, and social activity, cast in the form of Anthropocene landscape. Our catalogue reveals a complex loop of relationship between, on one hand side, processes by which this new material continuously have been forming an overall structure of the territory, and on another hand side, processes by which the territory simultaneously participated in the formation of these materials. Through the exploration of materiality of the settlement, which is apparently also named as material, we reveal an emergent symbiosis of the natural environment and eliminated matters brought in by the virtue of human activities. Nickel has been built as an element of the greater infrastructure dedicated to serve the mining industry of the Soviet Union. Later, this greater infrastructure was neglected, and so nickel was left to fight the harsh Arctic climate of the Murmansk region, as well to overcome a social economic crisis of the post-Soviet period. This settlement have been built in the area of extreme living condition. It appeared as an artificial organism covered by a top-down protective dome of vital infrastructure. Thereby, nickel became a great sample of gradient alienation of the form from the natural climatic environment it has been placed in. The artificial organism was protected and they were isolated and covered by a vital amalgam from top-down control for years. This kind of artificial urban formation of industrial settlement was scattered across the territory of the whole country, connected into a greater infrastructural network. Nickel is a particular case, but not the last one in the chain of mono-functioning cities of post-Soviet Russia. The story of nickel projects the future of place where natural environment was turned to a new realm that is not anymore depending from its geological, geographical, or atmospheric context, but can be artificially and technologically reproduced anywhere. This referring to Jakob Yuxu's concept of environment that got a meaning of not just a natural habitat of animals and plants, but also reproduction of the technical reproduction of that habitat in the alien surroundings. The settlement began an artificial ecology, raised under the protective dome within the idea of the natural habitat. The environment had been seen as an adjustable domain which was carried to the extreme. Here under the protective dome, within the decades, artificial ecology and new materiality emerged, which was following in a close logic of existence. Nickel and all the region has been maintained from the top down for many years. But due to new, more volatile economic and political circumstances, the town were left without sufficient control of the artificial ecology, and artificial ecology have to adopt in order to survive. The protective dome was destroyed. Nickel became an abandoned garden, space covered from now on by a broken dome, where all the elements of the local ecology, hidden under the most of worked out industrial pollution matter, and forced to search for a new logic of coexistence within the harsh condition of Arctic climate, or socio-economic crisis of post-Soviet Russia. Both the settlement in the large scale and materials shaping it on the micro scale in order to resist vulnerable conditions which were to be changed by developing new interrelation and physical characteristic. Artifacts we have collected, likewise objects from the cabinet of curiosities, are regarded as samples of unique ecologies, emerged under the protective dome and transformed when this dome has been destroyed. Observing this evolution of materials, textures, and artifacts, we are currently using them as an object of research and at the same time as a tool of study, the failed artificial ecology of the whole settlement.
Using a classification of the organizational concepts of ecological systems proposed by John T. Lyle in the article Design for Human System, we did formate 4 themes in which we grouped almost 300 artifacts and materials samples we have collected in Nickel. The first organizational concept you can see here, the one which Lyle proposed, is a structure, the composition of the biological community. The material entity of the city of Nickel have been shaped by successive ideological paradigms of the Soviet and the post-Soviet political context. Here we grouped materials related to the history of social and political rhythms structured the physical territories of the town. The second organizational concept is function, a flow of energy in materials. We call this section energy infrastructure. This group of materials represents nickel as an infrastructural element for the resource development industry, a life support mechanism of a large industrial machine. Third organizational concept is location, where we draw the boundaries over competing patterns of existing ecosystems. We called it self-organizing boundaries. This group of artifacts reveal the fragmented character of the city and trace out boundaries and borders which are naturally evolved in the town as a response to the overlay and resistance of different elements of Nickel's artificial ecology. At the last, we considered a physical representation of a new material appeared under the broken dome, a copper nickel dust, the byproduct of smelting of nickel ore. Our aim was to trace the immaterial qualities and forces this matter creates within a city.
Well, first section is a structure, the artifacts of the historical clash. The urban tissue of Nickel has been shaped by 5 periods. It's a Finnish era, post-World War II, with the Stalin Era, Khrushchev era, Brezhnev, and post-Soviet. From the beginning, the settlement was found as a center of technologically advanced industry, named Kolosseoke in Finnish, and then renamed Nickel during the Soviet time. We will skip some historical slides. We'll give a better introduction during our work. For the construction of the settlement, all materials and technologies have been imported. Usually buildings were made from brick, the first one. For example, Finnish city Pitsamo, located nearby, had 2 small brick factories, but it was not enough for the city construction. Therefore, lightweight concrete blocks were brought from Helsinki. The post-World War II period was characterized by the new policy of Soviet government, which obliged to use only local materials for the town construction. In 1945, on the basis of nickel factory, the stone, concrete factory, woodworking, carpentry, slag concrete, and sawmill were set up. The Stalin Era, at that time, the settlement started gaining the form of proper town. Nickel appeared in the form of neoclassic Stalin town, which probably you already realized today morning. Responding to the atmosphere of the new Soviet state, the historical layer of the town represented a top-end technological representation of the new model of living, the town as an ideal place to live and work. This layer was designed in a Soviet modernistic urban tradition which combined the features of the rich ensemble of public squares and promenades. In the condition of scarcity of resources of all constructions have to be organized in the most efficient way where all the resources are used. It led to bizarre overlay of the historical layers, where in one building can be seen the imprint of different epoch, as an example of this theater. Khrushchev era. Around the 60s, the large demand of the construction of more comfortable housing appeared. During the Khrushchev era, this demand was solved by a mass prefabricated production of multiple unit housing. The construction of housing followed regulation of the standard standard layout, but structure themselves were produced out of local materials, just opposing generic norms and local specific. And last period of construction, it's Brezhnev era. This is one of the largest, it's the densest area, but the most inhabitant. The typology of the panel housing series 11 used for the construction of this district initially have been designed considering the climate of central Russia. This housing have been used in nickel because of the bureaucratic mistake, a consideration of the average winter temperature and ignorance of strong wind and low temperature fluctuation. And I think this will see.
Dedicated to fight natural conditions, nickel is totally depending on a single monopolist, the state, not only an employer, but also a supplier of all resources, including most basic such light, heating, water. This section is inspired by the organizational concept which John T. Lyle calls function. This concept is closely intertwined with the structure of the ecosystem. He writes, respiration of the full by flow of energy and keeping this flow going, distributing energy to all the members of the community, a basic purpose of ecosystem function. Therefore, this section discovers how this process of exchange of materials and energy, functioning and failing to function, is captured in the physical form of the city infrastructure. During Soviet times, nickel had a highly subsidized infrastructure which was attracting people to come to live and work here despite of the extreme climatic conditions. The town served as an element of the big industrial machine, ignoring local nature. Nickel was shaping its own closed system, ready to fight and resist, but not to collaborate. Nickel developed a set of infrastructural elements of resistance, a network of central heating to resist cold climate, an infrastructure of the artificial daylight to resist conditions of the polar winter, and the list of norms regulating the resistance of the city to overall natural conditions of Arctic. A unique combination of the climatic, geographical, political, social, economical factors within the time reshaped the ambitious urban infrastructure of the past. When the housing started to get built, in a big scale, in 1960s, the network of central heating has been laid underground to distribute heat and water in the town. In the course of the time, facing the conditions of poor maintenance and low stable grounds, the underground infrastructure exposed to the surface. Now, mostly in the old part of the town, the central heating network is becoming a significant element of the surface of the urban landscape. In winter, the pipes running overground creates a micro-archipelagos of warm patches. In summer, one may perceive them as sculptural elements acting as obstacles for pedestrians. They form intertwined three-dimensional landscape, reminding about the alien nature of the town. The artificial lights is one of the primary elements of the infrastructure of resistance to the extreme environment. These lights serve to imitate sunlight during the polar winter, which lasts for a half year. In times of the economic crisis of 90s, these lights were working only limited hours. The city dwellers felt then a deficit of the light and were much affected by the lack of it. Today the lights are working in a full time again. They are mostly concentrated in the newest district of the city, indicating the most lively areas. One of the many Soviet industrial cities built in industrial scale within the principles of mass production, Nikel formed standard and regulation which were not very well adjusted to the local conditions. Here is an example of the typical project of the sports center, which had to be renovated to reduce the glazing surface. It's actually a very interesting northern Soviet modernism style appeared. So you can see how, let's say, Soviet modernist projects has been transformed to respond to the weather. Around 1990s, the new regulations has been developed, suggesting a particular color range for the street facades of the northern cities and towns. According to these regulations, the facades in the city has to be painted into the bright colors to compensate the color starvation of the inhabitants of the city. Within a time, these norms has been changed, and now town paints its facades in the pale colors. As you can see here, because of the harsh climate, the old bright paint shows glowing through the peeled off new paint, creating a unique texture over the settlement facades.
Well, the third organization concept inherent to the ecosystem is a location pattern. In ecology, it includes the precise analysis of the large-scale system and understanding where the smaller one fit into it. We call this section self-organization boundaries. Nickel has been as a closed system, controlled from top down, ignorant of the local environment. After the loss of the protective dome, the materials of town slowly developed some forms of interaction with the surrounding ecology. Within a time, gaining new qualities of open system, capable to communicate and adapt. Living systems are both closed and open, as the cities where both plant and organic often exist side by side. The tension between open and closed states creates a special condition between a system and its context. This condition is both porous and impervious simultaneously. We use a distinction of two notions introduced by Stephen Gould, border and boundary. The first one acts as an edge where things end, drawing an impervious wall between the organism and its environment. Boundary implies opposite, the distinguished area of habitat of an organism, which develops meaning of the communication between organism and outside environment. John Tully, in his article, says no ecosystem stands alone. Each system drawn in energy and materials from the system around it, and in turn export to them. Drawing the boundaries of the ecosystem, therefore, we need to consider the flows. that link it and its neighbors. In this section, we attempt to trace out the boundaries and borders nickel has created. This allows to perceive the town as a series of ecological patches which resist, compete, cooperate with each other. Those habitat patches appeared in the scale of single houses, flats, or in the scale of the urban block. Boundaries and borders between those patches have evolved and self-organized through the time, shaped by inherent and extreme forces of exchange between each locality. Here's, for example, of the strong borders around building. Here's another type, the same building, but without a board of resistance. Also in nickel, we discovered a network of boundaries which are arranged in the gradient of matters and species. This gradient belongs to both the town and nature, shaping new forms of other coexistence. We also discovered the pattern of patches which created the hard protective borders to resist the negative decay part of the settlement. The most fragmented part of the city is the territory adjacent to the industrial part. It is an expanded industrial buffer zone, which you can see is indication of the red line, where the town is slowly dying out. However, there we can see small clusters of the size of buildings or even the size of few flats, still showing the signs of life.
The fourth theme opens up the discourse of how a material appeared in Anthropocene may evolve within its environment and form a new post-humane ecology. Our research is particularly discovering new properties of a copper-nickel dust, primarily the industrial processing product, but later a destructive element of the local ecology. Copper-nickel dust, or slag, is a byproduct a substance within a process of smelting of nickel ore. Yearly, nickel industry produces 1.35 million tons of it. As we mentioned before, ironically, the city and the material gained the same name, nickel. Nickel is a real material and symbolic notion penetrates all the levels of the existence of the settlement, manifesting the evolution of the artificial ecology town has created. In the start, nickel material was the reason why the settlement was built. Later, the byproducts were used for the construction of the city. Today, products of nickel development process came into the unpredictable and continuous interaction with the local ecology and environment of the city. Nickel mining process appeared above the ground in the shape of streets, houses, squares, school. Nickel as a currency was crystallizing in the air as an essential force of the local microclimate. It's not a measurable climatic component as temperature, wind velocity, light amount, but the valuable matter that was allowing to build up a certain comfort layer for the human living. Nickel, as a non-physical entity, mostly as a social protection, were providing an artificial immune to the system, such as high subsidized pensions, double holiday time, early retirement, good facilities of sport and education. All those good climate factors were attracting specialists from the whole country. These energy flows was shaping all the aspects of the life of the city. Simultaneously, such valuable matter created by human culture turns against people and all the artificial system created by the industrial city. Nickel's industry vital for the town and the region during decades generated tons of matter toxic for the living organisms, in this way contaminating hectares of the territory. This is a map which we generated specially for this project. This map is indicating the spread of copper nickel dust in the town, Prevailing winds disperse slag and dangerous emissions of the industry over the residential part of the town. You actually can see here that because all the buildings has been oriented, let's say, north-south, in order to, let's say, have warm facades, but at the same time, all the prevailing winds bringing all the pollutions of the factory, which is actually at the top of this map, through the cities, kind of going
through the texture.
The toxic dust cut into the surface of the town, sharp black crystals of the slag slowly destroying the settlements from inside. Slag is accumulating in cracks between materials, penetrating through the surfaces, accumulating in the dark corners. Black dust mixed with the brightly painted surface of the city creates its specific texture inherent to most of the buildings of the town. This set of artifacts illustrate the attempt of local residents to use slag for the local needs. Down Nickel became an experimental plant testing a new use of this matter. Without a clear understanding of danger this substance can cause to humans. Slag has been widely used as a material for public spaces or housing. For instance, it has been used as an anti-slippery substance on the icy road, or the stadium surface filling. It's actually the stadium where we've been yesterday, where was the installation. Also, it has been used as a filling and insulation material for a floor construction already since the first days of the settlement. Later, it has been used also as insulation material for the walls. Within the time of application, slag revealed new properties. For instance, this building couldn't be demolished because of the strength the nickel dust mortar has accrued. After the 1960s, the local concrete factory started using the other byproducts from the mine production, so-called fillet. The filling material was approved without sufficient tests. Later, then unexpected chemical reactions were taking place, and panels got fragile and crumbled. So all the cracks in the building is actually had to be filled with bricks. In the 1970s, industrial plant of nickel has been smelting nickel ore imported from the east city Norilsk. Particularly, the smelting process of this ore was generating an extremely high level of sulfur dioxide emission in the atmosphere. This devastated all the ecology of the area. Today, nickel from Norilsk is not processed here, and nature slowly restoring itself. Within a time, local microorganisms and plants developed the form of coexistence within this alien substance. Copper nickel dust is a substance emerged within the phenomenon of this city and later created in symbiosis of the natural environment.
Well, we applied this archaeological method in order to explore the materiality of the ecology involved under the broken dome and investigate the power of matter that continuously accumulates on energy to live. In our research, we Sorry. In our research, the intention is bigger than just to write the history of the place through the properties of the Anthropocene materials and artifacts. The project presents not only the failed past of human ambitions to overcome the nature, but also the possible future of coexistence of nature and precious matter. So this is our conclusion and preparation for the next step of our guiding tour through the nickel that we're inviting you today.